Good afternoon, everyone.
Yes.
Oh, no. We're going to start all over. I come from a call and response tradition. Good afternoon, everybody.
Afternoon.
That's what I'm talking about. And it's been said before, happy Mother's Day. And I want to acknowledge all those who have birthed children also from your hearts. There's a lot of aunties and godmamas and all kinds of folks who have nurtured deeply young people in your lives. Teachers, so I want this day to also recognize you. My name is Rue Mapp. I'm the founder and CEO of Outdoor Afro, a national not-for-profit that's all about celebrating and inspiring Black leadership and connections to the outdoors. Thank you. I'm also a newly minted author. My book sale date is October the 4th. It's entitled Nature Swagger, Visions and Stories of Black Joy in the Outdoors. And so I am just a fangirl of these three amazing human beings who have written incredible stories, and let me introduce you to them. And then I'd love for each of you to, set the table a little bit more and say a little bit more about who you are. And I have just a few questions. And then after we have a chance to just have some dialogue with each other and the audience, we'd love to get you all involved in the conversation. And then ultimately, we want you to buy their books. So they're going to be here, even though I know you'll want to come down and say hi. They're going to be over in another designated area where you can buy their book, get it signed, and have a chance to ask questions. So does that work for everybody? Awesome. So let's see. The first person, I guess, to my right is Silvia Vasquez-Lavado. This is her book, In the Shadow of the Mountain, a memoir of courage. Welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. Thank you. And Ruth, to what you were saying, happy Mother's Day. And I know I talk about it on the book. And even, not necessarily you don't need to have birth children, but mother is a verb. So to all the mothering that many of you have done throughout the years of recognition, and thank you for sharing your time. It's an honor. I came a little earlier. I just flew in from Philadelphia yesterday. For those of you who might have read the book, I went to small school in Lancaster, and they asked me to give the commencement. And they gave me a doctorate. So I'm Dr. Sylvia for today.
Okay, Dr. Sylvia.
So, Dr. Sylvia in the house was running late, so I came in like, where am I?
You are right on time.
Right
and
on
thank
time.
you for the acknowledgement of the verb mothering.
Absolutely.
And maybe we can talk about how nature also gives us that nurturing.
Thank you.
Yes. Yeah. I wanted to hold up Valley of the Giants, stories from women at the heart of climbing, edited by Lauren DeLaunay Miller. And last but certainly not least, by Diana Hellmuth. Thank you. No, make me say it right. Okay, good. It's called How to Suffer Outside. A beginner's guide to hiking and backpacking. And I've already told her, I was like, where was this book in my life back in 1990? But let's get started. But again, I want to just do a little bit of housekeeping. Please, if you haven't already, turn off your phones, even if they're on vibrate. And I also want to acknowledge the Brower Center, the AV staff, all the staff for the Bay Area Book Festival who made this event possible. Lots of hard work goes into putting events together. Trust me, I know. And then again, the book sales and the signing location will be at the end. So sessions that are live streamed, there may be some, is this live streamed, do we know? Yes, it's live streamed. Oh my God, I better act real good. So let's get the conversation going. So I'd love to just set the table, each of you. And, we don't have to go in the order. You just talk when the spirit hits you, and even be in dialogue with each other. It's way more interesting that way. But I'd love to just set the table about, who you are and what your writing journey was to produce these three very distinct, but books that have in common a joy and love for the transformational possibility that the outdoors offers. So over to you.
Hi, I'm Lauren. Thank you guys so much for being here. Like we said, my book is called Valley of Giants, Stories from Women at the Heart of Yosemite Climbing, and it's an anthology of about 40 stories from the beginning of roped climbing in Yosemite, which happened in the 1930s, through the present day. And I spent 3 seasons working on the search and rescue team there, which is when I started putting this book together, and it just felt really important to me to I guess, highlight how far back women's lineage in rock climbing goes. I think that there's been a great push recently and an acknowledgement of how present women are in the sport of rock climbing today, but I felt like it's really powerful to see that that goes all the way back to the beginning of the sport. And so, yeah, that's kind of where this came from, and I'm just really excited to be here today. I've been spending a lot of time in Berkeley. I'm a master's student at the Graduate School of Journalism here in Cal, and yeah, go Bears.
Awesome. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Diane Helmuth. I wrote How to Suffer Outside because that's what you do out there. The sort of how I describe the book is that it's a permission slip I wish someone had given me when I was learning how to backpack, kind of relearning. I did a lot in high school where I learned the basics, and I write about this incredible program I was privileged to be a part of called Team, where they take 24 kids from across the school district and sort of throw them in a room with 2 teachers, no bells, and in addition to their regular academic programming, you get to go on 3 backpacking trips and learn how to backpack, which I think when you're a 16-year-old and you're just like so full of ennui you can barely roll over in the morning, having someone shove you outside and going, okay, figure it out, motherfucker, is really good for you. Pardon my language, sorry. I was told to stop using that word as much as I did in my manuscript. It was something my editor said. But anyway, the book is like this. I think there's a lot of people in the outdoor space who are doing this right now. And I'm one of the voices who's trying to also encourage this idea that you don't have to be a badass to go outside. You can be exactly who you are right now. Like, I am like a pudgy office worker. I spend most days screaming at spreadsheets, and I go backpacking. I climb up to 10,000 feet. I see the High Sierra. I do all these things that people are like, oh my God, you do that? I'm like, yeah. It's like, I mean, it's hard, but it's not as hard as you think. It's more accessible than you think. There's a few basics you have to cover. You just also have to be ready to forgive the idea of yourself as immediately becoming Bear Grylls. And you're gonna suffer, and that's fine. That's half the fun. So that's the premise of my book. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep. And everybody, hello once again. My name is Silvia Vasquez-Lavado, and I just was very lucky to publish In the Shadow of the Mountain, a memoir of courage. It is my crazy journey finding healing while climbing the tallest mountains in the world. Even though I come from Lima, Peru, and we have one of the most beautiful mountain ranges, and I'm sure some of you possibly might have visited, but I was never inclined to it. I actually have this photo when I was 5 years old with my family. We went to close to Huascarán, the tallest mountain in Peru, and there's a little boulder of about 5 feet that they wanted to take a photo, and everybody jumped, and I was having a tantrum at the bottom because I was scared of heights. So, but this is my very humble journey about finding healing, finding acceptance, and more important, finding myself while climbing mountains. And it is incredibly raw, vulnerable. It also involves a very special promise that I had made the very first time I went to the base of Everest to eventually return with a social cause. And so I'm incredibly fortunate to return guiding a group of young, inexperienced women to the base of base camp. And it feels like 3 books for the price of 1, just of the way that the stories go. And I've been incredibly grateful to now have the opportunity to start sharing more of these. And if anything, my quota, trying to get as many of you come and join me and being able to go into the world. We used to have the joke, I think it was with Ellen, that she said she will convert people. Anytime she converted a gay woman, they'll give a microwave. So for me, it's the whole journey of trying to convert as many of you in the outdoors. And yeah, maybe you'll get a water bottle instead. But
I love it. I love it. Well, let's get right into it. I mean, the connective tissue for me, experiencing each of your books over the last couple of weeks, has been so much about belonging. And so I'd love to hear, because we're women also experiencing nature, and I think a couple of y'all touched on that, in ways are not um, that are not assumed we'd be successful at. So let's talk a little bit about belonging, and what it meant for you to express that belonging through your book. When the spirit hits you.
I'll take a stab at it. I think hopefully this isn't like turning the question around too much, but I think one of the most profound realizations I have had while being outside is that no one is going to tell you you belong. You just do. Because nature is always there, has always been there, will be there after you, and we put up these boundaries around it, we colonize it, we represent different people in it or not, but the truth is it is just always there, just like vibing, doing its thing. Like, you can come or not, I'm just chilling, like whatever you want to do. And when you show up to it, once you drop all of this baggage of, am I hardcore enough, am I good enough, am I as in much danger as they say I am? If you're a woman, probably not, ironically, but no one tells you you belong. You tell yourself, or rather you just realize that you do. I think that has been pretty profound for me, and I think once I turned that corner, my entire relationship with nature and feeling self-conscious and feeling like, hey, I hike too, just shifted, and it was just a quiet confidence that kind of appeared in me that I've been really grateful for. Yeah.
And following up to what Diana is saying, I think for me, I actually felt the very first time I saw the Himalayas, I felt the mountains were allow me to feel that I belong somewhere. I felt welcomed in a way that not a single human had ever done, not including my parents. I mean, just because there was so much trauma, there was so much shame. And I will never forget that very second day of my very first trek to the base of Everest, leaving the town of Namche Bazaar, and then just seeing the Himalayas, and it's so imposing. And instead of feeling scared, I just felt this sense of protection, and something that was something that I had never, ever in my wildest dreams imagined could be possible. And I think that started that beginning of the love story. And of course, even when I get to the base of Everest that first time, I learned that the Tibetan word of Everest is Chomolungma, which means mother of the world. So that even made me cry, because I just felt that aspect. And that's what it was so important for me when sharing the story about, yeah, mother it can be a verb, and it can be a very powerful feeling. But yeah, that's actually in a way how I felt. I think the mountains gave me the sense that I could belong, and it was the very beginning of the transformation for me.
Yeah, I feel like something that I'm thinking about as I hear both of you guys speak is that the difference between feeling, I guess, that sense of belonging from the place and then from the community that inhabits that place. Like, I've always felt like I belonged in Yosemite. Like, that is my spirit place. Like, I had that same feeling the first time I went there, of feeling like I belong there. But the times that I felt like I don't belong there, it's not because of the place, it's because of the community there. And I've spent so much of my time trying to, prove that I belong there. Working, big wall climbing is a very macho sport, and I worked on the search and rescue team, which is the machoist of the group it's like the varsity team of big wall climbing, and there's always a couple of women there, but I feel like when I look back, I didn't think about these things. I just thought about how long I spent not wearing makeup or painting my nails or learning how to stand big to try to embody what I was seeing so that I felt like I belonged in those spaces. But there's such a difference between belonging in the place and feeling at home in the outdoors, and then seeing the way that that's kind of reflected by the other people that also kind of inhabit that space.
Yeah, and that actually leads me to something that each of you touch on in your own way about the people that inhabit that place. And, there was mention in an earlier conversation about the land back movement and the recognition that's become more regular of native lands and the people there. Can you speak about, how you move through these spaces with consciousness of the people who came before, and what are some of the opportunities that we get to show our appreciation for those people who preceded us?
I was just laughing with what Lauren was saying. Yeah, the mountains are not the problem. Nature's not the problem. The people are the problem. Yeah, that's. I love there is a silly joke about what's the difference between a mountain guide and God. God doesn't think he's a mountain guy. Yeah, that's kind of the ego that we've seen a lot. I'm sure. Yeah, it's what we see. So I mean, for me, I think the way that I have connected, at least with in my personal humble journey, I've always felt, I mean, mountains have been in existence for like hundreds of millions of years, and we are just these tiny little ants that are like crossing in. And I love whenever, especially it's very male oriented, and whenever people are interviewed, like, oh, you've conquered a mountain, and I laugh as I'm like, yeah, really, no, you can't conquer. And I always try to correct people because I feel, from now on, any of the mountains are looking at me going like, yeah, you think you conquer me? Come back and you'll see what's going to happen. But I feel that is, I remember from my own culture, being from Peru, and we had a lot of gratitude, for the Inca culture, which unfortunately was conquered by the Spaniards. But the Incas made it a very, the tallest mountain within each of the regions, they call it the Apus. And that's where they would go to hold the ceremonies. And it had almost, to them, it was possibly the highest representation of the earth. And so they had this beautiful balance and respect, which as I've been climbing, it almost made me proud that I have that heritage coming. And I think it comes down to our attitude and to us being able to change that narrative, for especially as climbing in the 1800s and 1900s became more of an exploration. It became almost this ego to overpower. I think we brought this narrative of conquering. So if we can undo that, which is possibly what we are all here, what we love, what we do, is if we can undo and show that it's not, what's the purpose of conquering? Where is the ego getting involved? So I think that has been my journey when trying to come at peace and trying to commute with mountains.
Yeah, I think that I'm sure some of you have spent some time in Yosemite, and as a visitor to a place like Yosemite, into a lot of our national parks, you kind of have to dig for the indigenous history. It's not necessarily put out there for the first thing for you to learn about, and I feel lucky that a lot of my time there was spent living in Camp 4, which is next to the tiny piece of the valley that the indigenous community has to make their home now, which is a very new thing in the last couple of years there. And I feel like, yeah, it's uncomfortable sometimes to visit national parks and to think about how they came to exist and what had to happen to the people that called those places home and still call those places home for these parks to exist. And I feel, I don't really have a conclusion, but I feel like it's really important when we take part of these sports that we take the time to think about how did it come to be that we came to think of Yosemite as a humanless wilderness when it was never that way. And I feel like that responsibility really falls on us to learn about the history and the present day people that call that place home wherever we are.
Yeah, I mean, I'll excuse me, I'll admit that I feel like it took me too long to kind of put together the idea that when I backpack and hike, I'm backpacking and hiking as a white person on indigenous land, and what that actually means, because oftentimes when you're white in America, you're not really asked to think about it, but there were a lot of social media movements that started bubbling up that just gently suggested I start thinking about it, that when I say I'm hiking in the Ansel Adams Wilderness, I'm actually hiking in like Washoe and Shoshone territory. And I hope that's correct. Sorry, that's off the top of my head. I apologize if it's not. But just having that in my mind did change my relationship with the land. And going back to what you said, Sylvia, I just noticed this shift that happened very organically in me thinking of nature as a place I go to battle it and prove myself, to just being with nature and having that be enough, as this shift from a conquering mindset to an appreciative mindset. And I mean, I'm a really big fan of Indigenous Women Hike. They're on Instagram. I know there are a lot of other groups that are supporting Indigenous people basically being represented in the outdoors, which is a crazy sentence, but a necessary one, right? And I mean, I think as a white person, my job is to just point and help amplify those voices. And I think they're growing, and I hope we can continue to help them grow. And I think if you're a hiker and a backpacker, I do think you have a little bit of a responsibility to be paying attention to those movements. I know it's changed a lot of my opinions on the land back movement and decolonization. Yeah.
Thank you. So I just want to take a little bit of a step back and get you all, because there are people in this audience who might have a story on their heart that they just need probably a little encouragement to share with the world. And these are your premier offerings of your story. And so I'd love to hear from each of you about that journey and some of the lessons that you may have learned, and any words of advice or encouragement you can offer any aspiring writers in the room.
Spirit seems to be awake. I think I've been having too much green tea. My spirit is like, yee, that's a great question. I mean, when I reflect to my own journey, and this, I tell this to a lot of young people, especially. I kept dreaming big. I kept dreaming. Especially, I was so touched by Everest, and I am somebody. I can say the word sucker. I'm a sucker for promises. I mean, and that is another thing that I'm hoping to show people is like all of us have made countless promises to ourselves, especially even on the 31st of December, New Year's, woo, making the listing. I want to do this. I want to do that. But we don't always hold ourselves accountable. And so for me, I think maybe because of my trauma and just because of being let down for so many times, I have made a purpose of promises. So I remember when I promised I was going to return to Everest, I think there was a part of me that kept saying, the more I could say the story out loud, maybe something will materialize. And so one thing I remember as I started sharing my story, it was always easy for me to share that crazy dream, almost just to keep saying it out loud. So I think for all of you, and that's the one thing that I keep telling everybody, we all have a book within ourselves. We all have our own journey. Not a single journey is ever going to be different. And there's never going to be the perfect timing. That's the one thing. But the one aspect that I have learned is own that story in you that you want to share. Own it, practice it, share it out loud. I remember when I would tell people how the mountains made me feel that first time on the base camp on the trek, and just as feeling that emotion of inclusion, of acceptance. You know, people would tell me, "Oh my God, my skin just my little hair got all lit up," and so I think we can just trust that. I think owning that narrative within ourselves, it is possibly the very first step to get closer to share that story out loud. I feel that took. I think I started talking about the journey. Even after I took a hiatus, maybe 2013, I kept saying, one day I'm going to return, one day I'm going to return. And it's almost like the more we just almost start putting the seeds in our heads to eventually happen. But owning that narrative, and don't try to compare it to anyone else's. I've always felt, and even for me, when it came to trying to write a book, there's so many books about climbing Everest, so many out there. But the one thing that we just need to own is that our journey is always going to be different. No one could ever compare. So just keep trusting that. And especially if it's something that you feel could help others, even better. But that's the homework for you, at least from my humble viewpoint.
Yeah, it's interesting to think of myself trying to encourage others to share their story, because my book is an anthology, and so a lot of my job was to compile all these stories and to reach out to women and frankly convince them that their stories were worth telling. And I never got any pushback from anyone who said, I think your book is dumb and not a good idea. But what I did get a lot of was, this is so cool, and I don't know why you're asking me to be a part of it. I'm just a person. And I felt like all of a sudden my job often was coaching and trying to convince people that they should share their stories, which is funny because I probably also was hiding behind the anthology in a way to not talk about myself. I would never, if someone had approached me to be in this book, I would have also said, no. Like, there's no way. There's so many more qualified people than me, you know? I'm not a very good climber, you know? Like, that's not, and I would say, well, I can't be in a book about that. And it's funny to reflect on that now in this question because, yeah, I think that what I really learned from my contributors that I worked with was that they had to feel some sort of permission to share their stories. And I think that that's something that, in my experience, women are more likely to do, to feel like they need to be given permission to tell their own stories. And I feel like we definitely do not see that in male climbers and their excitement to tell their own stories. And I feel like, God, if we just, they're also just mediocre climbers telling their stories, and we could be mediocre climbers telling our stories. And I just felt like, oh, that willingness to just jump in and be a human telling a story about being a human is so much more what I found through working with these contributors than feeling like you had to be the first or the fastest or, you know, do something really monumental in order for it to be worthy of writing about.
I'm going to call my mountaineers after this and ask if we can change the tagline of my book to a celebration of mediocrity in the outdoor space. But I mean, my book did start as a joke. Like, literally, I was backpacking with a friend. We were, Jeannie, the woman in the book, we were 19 years old. We were in the Paria Canyon. We thought we were lost. She had 10,000 blisters on her feet because she wore the wrong shoes. She fell into quicksand. We thought we saw a rattlesnake. I fell down. And then we just turned to each other and started laughing, like that, like, end of the world kind of laughter. And I was like, we should write a book about how good we are at this, I think, because we're really good at it. And then, ironically, that did end up becoming the book, because it's like, oh, if we can literally do it and not die, probably everyone else can. And isn't that worth saying out loud? But in terms of advice, I feel like I want to make sure that I actually answer the question, but I want to echo everything that Sylvia and Lauren said, but also just, I don't know, for any writers in here, just in terms of deep practicality, I wanted to write my whole life, and I didn't write until I made time for writing. And how I made time for writing was accountability. And how I got accountability is I got in a writing group. So every week there was a group of people going, "Where's your stuff? We're upset with you now." And I'd go, "Okay, I feel bad. Here's some stuff." And then before you know it, you can write a book if you just do that, depending on your motivations. I'm very guilt motivated, but I think this idea of having an accountability group wherever you get it, or a person, just some sort of actual accountability will make you write, because you will always have other stuff to do and you don't always want to write. But to write a book, you have to kind of push through those, and it helps to have people. So that's honestly my biggest advice.
Thank you. As someone who, writes about and makes like a living connecting people to nature, sometimes I realize like I'm not getting the medicine myself enough. So I'd love to hear how you're making time and where you're making time to continue your own personal journey connecting with the outdoors.
I feel so called out right now. I feel like you saw my Instagram. No, the other day I looked at my Instagram and I was like, I'm supposed to be a hiker. And it's just the last 100 photos are of like my cat and like this building I saw. And I'm like, right.
But it's
I need to
hard
hike.
though. I think
Yeah.
that's real. I mean, it's really something that, I look up often. I'm just like, wait a minute, I need the medicine as much as the people I'm telling to go get the medicine. And, time to write a book, and time to promote the book, and all of your other family and pet responsibilities can eat up your day. So so maybe you can talk aspirationally, but I want to recognize, that the practice of it and sharing it and the lived experience, is something we have to stand for. So how are you standing for that in your own life?
Yeah, it's funny because someone also at an event asked me recently how writing this book has changed my climbing. And I said, I don't have time to go climbing anymore. That's how it changed my climbing, is that I don't do it anymore. But I think that through that and like through, I'm in grad school, which also doesn't really give me a lot of free time, but I feel like, oh, what I learned is that I just need to be outside, period. And sometimes that's like sitting on my porch, and that's in downtown Berkeley, and that's the most outside that I am getting, but I feel like the actual medicine of the sun is really important. And I think as someone that used to, for a long time, feel like if I wasn't really going for it, then wasn't then it wasn't almost wasn't worth doing, right? Like you can't just go have a chill day of climbing. I felt I was someone that always needed to be going for it. And now I just feel like ugh, I'm just so happy if I just get outside and to walk around the block or do anything to like make sure that every day I spend some time outside. And I feel like it's been really helpful to just totally have to let go of being a great climber and being in grad school at the same time. And I feel like it's really helpful though. Like I feel like this is a really helpful thing that I'm going to continue to use, even hopefully one day when I'm not in school anymore, to be able to just appreciate all time outside and putting no pressure on myself to accomplish anything while I'm out there.
I mean, I think for me as well, I kind of have been so blessed and grateful on just the reception of the book, and but also it's demanded a lot of time. Been doing different book tours, traveling here, traveling there, and I've been too comfortable giving myself permission. Like, okay, well, if we can do it, no maybe not next month, no, maybe not this month, maybe next month, but I just. I have the situation that I eventually, I mean, the book is getting turned into a film, and all of a sudden I went like, oh God, I better start kind of getting back in shape before, before whoever's going to play me is going to have to, kind of gain weight. And I was like, okay, not that there's any problem with it, but it was more like, oh, I got to look the part. But I realize I mean, to what Lauren was mentioning, I think and I think a lot of times, especially because I love big expeditions and I love that opportunity, and that takes a lot of time and allocating it. And the way that I've done it is already just we change the format and being like, let me just go down my street. There's a beautiful canyon, and let me just go running on that part. Let me take my bike out. So little baby steps, and even I had a small garden. Let me work a little bit on the garden. I mean, just in a way of connecting. And then, open up to the opportunity. I was trying to go to, I've never been to Shasta. I'm taking myself there next week, going on my own expedition. And it is just, it's almost like push it. And I think we just, at least for me, I was finding myself just hold yourself accountable and trying to put, and I know life is going to get on the way, but when you think of that big expedition, that can be trickier. So cut it down. Just even putting yourself, to a park. And even if you're trying to train for something, I tell people, bring a tire, pull a tire, just around the corner of your house. Don't be shy of it. I mean, and it is just a baby step will get you reconnected to it. So that's been my experience.
Yeah, I can add to my answer instead of just apologizing for my Instagram. I mean, I think something that's true is, especially in social media, a lot of backpackers who have these followings, it seems like it is literally all they do. Like somehow they make a living and all they do is backpack, the dream. But I don't know if anyone is actually doing that. I really probably only go out 2 or 3 times a year into actual backcountry. And that's always so beautiful because you feel like you're going deeper into nature, somewhere more sacred because it's less seen and it's always profound and you cry and you see God and it's amazing, blah. But there is something to be said for just get up and walk down the street, go to your local park. In the Bay Area, we are blessed with, I mean, incredible. I cannot believe Oakland has all these redwoods in the hills. They're just right there, guys. They're just right there. But very ironically, when I was writing this book, I wrote it during COVID. All the national parks were closed, and a lot of people were like, how can national parks close? It's air. I'm like, have you ever been to a national park bathroom? Okay. Heinous. That's how you get all the COVIDs all at the same time. It's going in there. I absolutely get why they shut everything down. But I was just sitting the whole time writing this book about how much I loved being outside, and I actually slipped a disc in my back while writing this book about how much I loved going outside, sitting inside for a whole year. And I was like, this is actually a fantasy book that I'm writing. It's not nonfiction. It took me a long time to figure out how to heal, and now I am much more. It was definitely a journey, but what I discovered is if I walk, everything feels better. I just have to walk. It's like my body was literally like, stop sitting. We're actually gonna give you an injury so that you can't sit in a chair for 2 months. Literally, I had to like eat standing up and like work laying on my belly. It was crazy. Um, so if you don't walk, your body will actually punish you. Let me be a lesson to you all. And yeah, go walk under a tree. It's good. It's good for you. Even just 5 or 10 minutes a day.
Thank you for that. I think that, people think about peak experiences as the more valid experience to have. And it's really in those everyday moments. And so thank you for reminding us all of that.
But I'm curious, what about you? I mean, yeah.
Oh,
Great question.
okay. So I
Great
do all
question.
the things, y'all. I walk my dog. So dogs will keep you outside. I also, I have a boat. So I've gotten into that. I also hunt and fish. So yes, like it's a whole lifestyle for me. But there was a time when I was traveling a lot, trying to get Outdoor Afro off the ground, and I ended up gaining like 30 pounds because you just get, on the plane and you eat, and then you go to the event and you sit and you eat, and then you get back on your plane, and and that in the lack of sleep. So I really, in the last probably 3 years, just had to right that ship for myself. To your point, it's like you do have to walk the talk. You do have to look something like you walk at least. um, but I don't stress myself out about it. And I think the takeaway that you all shared is that the outdoors is everywhere and it's all legit, y'all. Like you don't have to be, climbing, 14ers in order to be seen as having a valid outdoor experiences. And by the way, the Oakland Redwoods, where I grew up, are my favorite place to hike. Walkie Miller, don't sleep, y'all. Don't sleep. I mean, so I just, again, and we're blessed in the Bay Area to be literally within 10 minutes of a place that you just go, oh my gosh, am I still in the Bay Area with the sweeping vistas and the beautiful sunsets and all the birds and wildlife that are here. It's really a privilege to be here. So that's my answer. It's an effort, but I do it. Wonderful. Well, I think it's time to turn the question and answer period from me to our audience. I would love for you all to raise your hand. We have a microphone because you'll have to speak into the microphone because this is a recorded session. I don't care how loud your voice is, you still need a microphone so that we can be sure and capture it on video. And we have one question already. Great, thank you. And if you can say your name and where you're from, it just helps us to build our community in this room.
I'm Linda from Oakland, and my question to you is, what do you say to other people, women, but also men, who are sure that it is really unsafe for you to walk, 10 minutes by yourself alone? Like specifically, like getting that solitude in nature, having access to that. Thanks.
I would say, depending on the location, a lot of things have, I mean, in some areas there they used to be safe, maybe might not longer be safe. But as Rue was mentioning, the whole Bay Area as a whole has certain pockets that I think maybe because they're not so urban might make it easier. I would say potentially maybe even try to see if you could, I mean, because of course, having that time for yourself for 10 minutes without the fear of somebody doing anything. But it could be interesting to maybe try to arrange with maybe another friend in which you can go together and then maybe at a certain point separate for you to have your own experience. Else, I think there is just so many areas to explore that are very isolated that usually what I have found, I train a lot in Marin County. And maybe because where the parking is to where the trails are, it is very difficult for somebody to try to, do it. I mean, try to steal or anything like that. So I find my solitude on that degree. So I have found that at times, and also conscious of the time of the day of doing it. During the morning, afternoons, early evenings, where there is natural light, it's a little bit potentially safer. But I mean, yeah, it is a location. I know that there is just plenty of spaces. It is unfortunate that, some times have changed. I feel things are temporary, but maybe as we have adjusted so much with the pandemic, maybe a little bit of an adjustment until maybe you feel the connection or the safety again.
Yeah, I would add that, I moved here to Berkeley from a pretty rural place, and so feeling safe in this more urban environment has been a huge learning experience for me, because I felt like sometimes am I more scared walking home at night from school than I do, backpacking alone or something like that. And there's been this whole learning experience for me, but I also feel like the flip side of that, which we don't always talk about, is the risks of not going. And that things like loneliness and sadness and, literal vitamin D deficiencies and health and those sorts of things are also risks, and they're not as acute. So I feel like they don't capture our imagination as much, but I feel like when I'm in that decision point, I feel like you have to kind of think, what are the risks of not going? Because there's our risks to staying inside forever also, and I think, not that there aren't real, very valid risks outside that we take too, especially more in relation, I think, to other people than to things of nature. But yeah, I tried to think too of what's the risk of not going? What happens to my mental health if I don't go, if I stay scared? And yeah, I think that's kind of the flip side to taking care of the actual risk part, which Sylvia talked about.
I want to just throw in some sprinkles on that. But to second what you said, I think it sort of depends on where you're going. But speaking more specifically to hiking and backpacking, my experience, I'm a hiker and a backpacker. I'm not a climber. I'm not a mountaineer. But in my slice of the outdoor world that I see, I actually see more women than men. I see tons of solo women. The last time I was hiking in Kings Canyon, I saw a group of men and I was like, oh my God, hi. You're the first men I've seen in 2 days. So I think I'm almost like we're like silently taking over in that space. But maybe Lauren can talk about this a little bit. I know that they've done some studies, and when they look at evac calls, they either find no difference in gender, or men are actually more likely to get themselves into trouble. So if anyone's like, isn't it unsafe for women? I'm like, literally, the data says it is not. Personally, I just think there's more women out there than men. When I am out in nature, I am more afraid of humans than bears or mountain lions. And there's that you're very alone, and there's that little voice in your head that's like, what if the serial killer is right there? And you're like, oh my God. But the truth is, I'm probably safer there than I am sleeping at home, to be honest. So yeah.
And
Yeah.
sorry.
Oh, I was just going to add that I've been in 2 different outdoor spaces where it's been really highlighted to me how much more likely to get in trouble men are in the outdoors, in terms of when I worked in Yosemite on the search and rescue team, we often kind of talked about our classic patient who was like a dude in his 20s who had told his friends, watch me do this thing, and then had gotten himself into trouble. And also in the world of backcountry skiing, in the avalanche world, statistically the most, at least this is what I was told when I took my avalanche course quite a long time ago, was that the safest thing you could do as a backcountry skier is to ski with women, because they're so much less likely to end up at a backcountry avalanche, that the best thing you can do is to travel with a team of other women. And that's not because they're not going into those places, it's because of an assessment of risk, and and that maybe something in our culture makes us pre-programmed to stop and think before we enter things. And because I think we often have to, and that we're walking around cities constantly assessing risk in a way that men are not. And I think that, in general, and I think that skill actually transfers to be a great skill that you take into the outdoors, which is that we are constantly have antennas up for just assessing our situation in a way that I don't know if men have to do that throughout their daily life quite as much. A lot of people are shaking their head no, so I feel like I'm onto something.
I was just going to mention, I think, I don't know if I already said it, but it's almost what's hitting to me is, it's a bummer that maybe the place that you used to go is no longer as safe, but maybe it's the invitation of nature being like, let's explore a little bit more. And then maybe it will be a little bit of finding out what other locations that could be close, whether you could organize to get to visit that can give you that space. I think if you have found a lot of connection to a particular place that no longer feels safe, there's plenty of more of those.
Yeah, and I just want to tag in also that there are so many affinity groups now that exist where you can go through Meetup or on Instagram. I know Diana mentioned some in her resources area, that there are people who share maybe the same trepidations, don't know where to go, what to do, what to bring, and who will, help you, through a kind of a training wheels approach, get outside. And I just find, especially with the Black community, that we have a living generation who remembers lynchings in the woods. So we've had to really kind of push through a lot of the fears and perceptions also in our community. And the group experience has been an incredible way for people to get past those feelings of not feeling safe. And also the recognition that sometimes we're still more safe there than we are in our own communities. So thank you for that. So important. Any other questions? Yes. And if you could say your name and where you're from.
Hi, I'm Diane Lebeau. I'm from San Francisco, and this is so weird because I've always been the youngest person in groups, and now suddenly in the last few years, I'm the oldest person. So I want to just say a few things from my perspective. It's so exciting to see all these women who are being athletic, because when I was growing up in the 50s, women were kind of wusses. They didn't want to do anything. I've always been athletic. I was a horse trainer. I was a scuba diver. I was a mountain biker, and I have a new memoir out called Dancing on the Wine Dark Sea, about my travel adventures around the world, particularly working with women in different cultures, including Afghanistan. But my point, which isn't that happy a point, is you get creaky when you're older. And I used to be invincible, and I'm not anymore. And especially the pandemic and getting this book done, my arthritis increased, and all my friends say, let's go for a hike. And I'm so slow walking that I'm not really fun, to walk with. So I don't know what the answer is to old age, but enjoy when you're really flexible. And enjoy.
Thank
Well,
you
you
for
still
that.
look pretty fun to me.
Yes.
But you know what? Lauren, do you want to speak to this? Because one of the things I really appreciated in your book was just showing this long story of, over generations of women climbers and the reasons why women were not. And do you have anything to offer about just continuing that journey throughout the ages?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking of this as you were speaking, and some of the women that I talked to who were in college in the 50s, who got into climbing, often did because like traditional sports were at their colleges were not necessarily open to them, and that there was a lot of women who'd maybe had opportunities at private high schools to try sports, and then went to places like Stanford where women weren't allowed to do sports because they thought that it wasn't maybe good for their reproductive abilities, very specifically, and then said, oh, well, I could turn to the Alpine Club because the Alpine Club isn't turning anyone away, and that seems like a thing that I can do outside. And it's just really interesting to then see, I think there was a boom in climbing that was related to gymnastics, and that gymnastics were a place that was welcoming for women. This is more like in the late 60s, early 70s, and gymnastics is quite related to climbing in a lot of ways, and was a place where women were allowed to build strength and flexibility that transferred to outdoor sports too. And so it's interesting to hear from your perspective, because for me, I saw a huge boom by the late 70s, early 80s in climbing that I feel like is probably tied to things like Title IX and women being able to just imagine themselves in athletic places. Because I think that so many of the women that I talked to got into climbing for a love of just being outside and trying to do anything athletic, and then became athletes there because they maybe didn't feel like they'd been invited into into more traditional sports, which are the pathways for a lot of people. Like, I feel like the ways that men got into climbing, the ways that women got into climbing were really different because of maybe what they were able to do in high school or as kids, and what they were and just what they were encouraged from. Like so many of the women that I talked to, their parents encouraged them to climb trees and go scrambling and to play outside as girls. And I think that doesn't seem like that was everyone's experience, or even still is today. And so I think just where we envision ourselves and like what women should be doing is such a big part of that when it comes to athletics and how that transfers to outdoor athletics.
I think we have time for one more question. Wait for the mic, and if you can say your name and where you're from, I appreciate it.
Oh, okay, great. This is more in the form of a comment. Closer to home, we have there's a website, berkeleypaths.org. There's more than 100 paths, walking paths in Berkeley, and most of them in the hills, and they'll take you up to the sweeping vistas if you just get up and go. And right now, as we speak, there's hundreds of people up there enjoying the views and the scenery that accompany these paths. We're retired people that build them. Help us out.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very important. So many. I mean, we're lucky. We have like state parks, national parks, regional parks, city parks, paths. It's endless. So I'll just turn to the panel and give you all the last word, and literally the last word to the question that I have. If you could describe in one word the truth that you want your readers to take away from your book. One word. Do, 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 do. Sorry. One word? One word. She's a rule breaker, okay?
Permission.
Thank you.
I think for me it might be lineage.
I think what comes to me is community. Yeah, yeah.
Thank you. And may we all anchor ourselves in these words.
Yeah.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.